it is. If it's like I'm not writing, I have a very difficult time summarizing my thoughts.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is. Maybe too much in there.
There's so much of the mental health brain space that goes into what you do here that's just kind of naturally worked into the model that I felt like that conversation had to happen.
So you just got off the turf, you worked out, it's what, it was 6:30 that you worked out. And then, I've worked the last few days kind of in a row, and so naturally I get kind of tired. It's a very physical job, it's a very active job, and you need to be kind of peppy and upbeat. No one wants to work out with the trainer who's kind of like, tired and that kind of stuff. So I was wondering, like for instance, just now when you took a shower to get ready for this, I took just 5 minutes of quiet music, not really meditating, but I just kind of contemplated what we wanted to go over today. Close my eyes and just kind of detach for a second.
Center yourself.
Yeah. What is it that you do with your profession? I gotta imagine that dealing with some of the issues that you deal with, that can be pretty heavy, and that could bog you down. Like, what type of, stress relieving things do you do for yourself?
Yeah, so, you'll hear a lot of people say, and particularly people in my field will say that a lot of times therapeutically the best thing for you as far as removing yourself from stressors that you're around at work or wherever your day-to-day is to engage in something that's really the opposite of what that environment is. So for some folks who are whose jobs are really physically oriented, for you, for example, I mean, you're on the turf all day, you're helping people out, you may be doing a workout or two on yourself. Your counter to that might be to engage in something like non-physical,
like read or something.
Yeah, exactly. So something that really just disrupts that space for you. So for me, you're right. I'm working with people who have very heavy stories that I have to kind of carry with them. So for me, I disengage completely. I watch stupid shows on TV that are just escapist, or I come to the turf because for me, although being here is weighty in its own sense, and that I have to learn the tasks, and I'm aware of my score and those sorts of things. The physicality of what I do here takes me out of that really heavy mental space that I'm used to being in. So this is really therapeutic for me in that way.
And that's exactly kind of why I was asking you, because recently, people tell me this often, but I had a discussion with a member here who said that she absolutely loves Sypher because it's her type of meditation.
Yeah.
And we both got to talking about how, for instance, when you do something like yoga or running, no, those are two different things to kind of compare.
Okay.
If you're running outside, chances are you're not as present with yourself. You kind of think about whatever it is. At least for me, speaking on my behalf, I'll think about what I got to do today. I'll think about Logan and that kind of stuff. I'll think about just whatever else it is, but not the actual physical activity that I'm doing. Yoga, you kind of go inward, and I don't want to say block everything out. You kind of recognize it and then accept it and just don't. Yeah. Where Sypher is, I think, the complete opposite, and I feel like I do get into my best meditative state when I have a barrage of stimuli. So you got the physical aspect, you got the mental aspect where you have to actually stay within the routine, figuring out the progression, you have to know the forms, all that kind of stuff, that you don't really have time to think about anything else.
Yeah.
And for me, and I think this person that I was speaking to, you need that. You need that immediate, you need something that needs your attention for an entire hour to where you can't think about anything else but what you're doing.
Right.
And I just like to hear that that's what a lot of people get out of it, because it's hard for me to, get in that clear thinking state of mind, that purge, without having that overstimulation.
Well, and again, that's part of what I love about this workout is, when I'm working with clients, not only am I there in the moment with these very heavy things that they're carrying, but I'm constantly thinking ahead to how does this work into their overall treatment plan, or how does this work towards their goals, or what do I need to do in the next session to properly address this. And so like I'm trying to stay 2 or 3 steps ahead so that I'm doing my job properly. So I'm not just doing like, we call them just like spontaneous interventions, to where like I'm not just meeting with the person in the moment and then we're just going moment to moment, right? We have long-term goals that we try to reach. Yeah. At Syphus, I have the luxury of focusing on the here and now, almost to the exclusion of everything else. And that's, to me, that's why like the most important test is the one you're on is so important, because like I'm so used to existing in that space where I have to be 2, 3, 4 steps ahead of myself. Yeah. And I've struggled with that here, where like I'll look at the board, I'll stare at the board, and I'll think.
I've said it a couple times. Yeah, I mean, I see that with a lot of people. Yeah. That's usually when I'm like, you okay? You good?
Yeah, I notice that. So like I'll look 2, 3 tasks ahead, and I have to really counter that with myself and say, nope, this is where I'm at. This is what I need to do. So yeah.
So when I work out, when I do Syphus, I would say most people that are doing it, they're doing it for activity. They're doing it for exercise. They're doing it for the physical benefit. I've been doing it so long, and I obviously came up with it, all that kind of stuff. I'm more about chasing a certain feeling. Yeah. And it's pursuing a certain state of mind, and I don't get it very often. I get it maybe once every 10 workouts. And it's when everything kind of comes together, where it's a good group of people, where I don't have to like be looking left and right to help people out. I'm really focused on the task at hand, where I get to the point to where I can feel like every single muscle group that's working, that should be working, and I can kind of really be so present with my muscles, or my heartbeat, or whatever it is, or the perfect playlist. But I don't get it very often, but it's like a runner's high, but like even more so. Yeah. And so to me, when I work out, that's really what I feel like I'm chasing, but it's hard to put into words, I guess.
Yeah, well, and it sounds like when all of that kind of aligns the way, like when those conditions are optimal for that experience for you, it just kind of happens that way. Like it's not something that you're necessarily creating. It just happens and you're experiencing it.
Yeah. So yeah, and it's alluring. It's like I call it the like, when a shark smells blood, or not smells blood, but they like, whatever it is, they sense it, and they go after it. I feel that way when I feel that sense coming closer. And so it motivates me to go harder. Yeah. And I feed off the people that are next to me. So, have you ever done sensory deprivation or flotation?
I have, no, not like the chamber or anything. Yeah. No.
Okay. Because I did it once.
Okay. How'd that go?
Interesting. Okay. So it's the opposite of what we were just talking about with the barrage of everything. It almost thrusts you in that state of nothingness. Yeah. For people that don't know what a sensory deprivation tank or floating is, what it's called, it's like this chamber, like you said, like a little, almost like a pod, like a box, big enough for you to not be able to touch the sides, and it's filled with Epsom salt, enough to make you buoyant. And the water's like body temperature. So all you do is you just sit there and you float. Yeah. Which seems like what's the point of that? But all you can do is just hear your breathing in and out and nothing else. And you just feel like you're floating in air. And so some people do it for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours.
It sounds amazing.
So I did that. It was the year I opened here, 2012, that was before it was like even really heard of. So I drove all the way down to Monroe to try it out with a buddy. And it was really cool, but I don't think it's for everybody. But I just was wondering if you did that, because I was thinking how polar opposite that is of this.
No, well, and so I'm like you in that, like, I'm very like sensory seeking. So like I like to walk through casinos, and I like to walk through crowds of people and just be in spaces where like there's lights and sounds and sensory stuff. I like that kind of activation, as long as it's on my terms. Like if I'm in chaotic environments, that's.
I was going to say, because I'm not really like that.
Oh yeah. If I'm in control of it, I seek it out. So for me, even something simple like just standard mindfulness type exercises is a form of sensory deprivation in that like I'm separating myself from those.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so the idea of mindfulness just as a practice is essentially just focusing on the here and now. And that can mean different things for different people. So for some, that's the full-on like, legs crossed, candles lit kind of thing. You're in a dark room. For some, it's sitting prone with your eyes closed or, laying down or whatever it is. So for me, I have a lot of like muscle tension, arthritic type symptoms from a skin condition. And so I'm sore a lot. So for me, I use an exercise called progressive muscle relaxation, where you're basically just tensing and then releasing certain parts of your body. You're basically doing a body scan. Your eyes are closed, you're in a comfortable position while you're doing this, and you can even incorporate some like positive self-talk stuff. So if I'm trying to if I'm starting my day with it, I might just say like, my hands are calm, and I'll just scan my body and repeat that talk. So there's a mindfulness piece of that too. So different people.
Presence with your muscle group that you're flexing.
Exactly. And then there's that actual physical sensation of you're acknowledging it and you're letting it go. And you're acknowledging it and you're letting it go, which is kind of a big part of mindfulness. Like you're bringing awareness to those things that are going on with you and you're letting them go. And you're focusing on the here and now. Yep.
Same thing with Sypher.
Yeah.
So my job or the pro's job is to bring awareness to the muscle group that should be working. And if you're doing it effectively, your brain is present with that movement, such as the body scanning. And I've actually, I go to bed. I don't start my day with it, so I'm the other way. I go to bed doing the same thing, but I find that to be a little more too stimulating. I need something more hypnotic to kind of get me to decompress.
Like what?
Just guided meditations to the point to where it's, I don't even want to say kind of what they say, but it's like relax, like very melatonicc kind of tones.
Yeah.
I will listen to different hertz, binaural beats, that kind of stuff, because I got so many thoughts that kind of go on in my head.
Yeah.
It'll be, for me, it's a constant state of creativity that I cannot turn off sometimes. And it's a good thing sometimes, and other times it's a bad thing. So I need something to just, like you said, almost like mindless watching television. For me, it's The Office. I've seen every episode probably 10 times.
Yeah, that's great.
But I need something that I can be I'm not going to think about anything. So guided meditation helps me go to sleep. But I just found it interesting that you're talking about the, what is it called?
Progressive muscle relaxation, or PMR. Yeah.
So progressive muscle relaxation. So Sypher would be kind of like progressive muscle activation.
Engagement or activation.
Yeah,
I agree with that. Yeah. And it's funny that you say that because, I remember there was a workout that I had done where, and I tend to mislabel easy tasks as the one I know how to do. Right. So I'll do a task that's considered easy, what is it called? All out when you're, explosion when you're going to 3 and then you're.
Oh, that's takeoff.
Yeah, takeoff. When you're pushing to 3.
The takeoff is the push. Explosion is just run.
Yeah. So I'm thinking of takeoff, and I'm winded by the end of it.
Oh, for sure.
And you made the comment if you're doing it right, you should be winded by the end of it instead of it just being one of those easy things that you throw in there as a gimme.
What it is that spikes your heart rate.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I have to devalue that score. It's not worth as much as it should be because it's one of those cheated exercises.
Yeah, exactly.
But you said something about not giving enough care to the minor task or the easier task.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that you need to give the most care. It's the mundane. I think I said that last time. The mundane task. That's the whole form first mentality. And you're getting me thinking about another thing you said too, so I'm trying to get off topic.
Okay.
You said that practice in mindfulness. For me, I have to repeat form first to myself because if I'm getting kind of scatterbrained like I was just a second ago, I'll think form first. I'll reel it in.
Yeah.
So that's my little chime, if you will, to focus. Okay, what am I doing right now? Stay with it, and then same thing with the easier tasks. Those are the ones that people, especially who've been doing it a long time, be like, oh, this is my rest. This is my rest. When really, if it's, Syphus or just in everyday life, taking out the garbage, you just try to have some pride in what you do.
Yeah.
And but you hit the nail on the head with that.
Well, and the interesting thing is that in theory, you would think that those easier tasks are the ones that are the ones that you're putting the most effort in, because your confidence level is up.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily concerned about or you're not anxious about how it's going to go. You have some idea of what to do. So that should be maybe some of your best effort, or because you already know the mechanics of it. So that's kind of my focus on those tasks. If I can look at the board and see that, hey, I know those first few, I'll go all out, because my confidence is up and I feel like I can accomplish it, and that drives my performance more. So, yeah.
Confidence is an amazing motivator. It's if you have a select task that you're like, I excel at this, and you see it coming up on the board, you feel like you can kind of not show off, but be like for me, it's like jumping. Even though I hate jumping, it's like one of those things. Like I can do it far, So the correlation and the connection of exercise, mental health. There's been numerous studies about how exercise improves state of depression or fighting depression, Alzheimer's disease, dementia. There's ones recently out that pertain to higher intensity is actually more beneficial, and same thing with physical results. They say high intensity, sometimes interval training, but I'm curious as to what your input and what your expertise kind of says.
Yeah, so we talked before about addressing health as kind of the whole person, and fortunately, studies on the impact of physical health on overall well-being date back to the early 1900s. So we have a lot of data on just how effective it is. In fact, when you look at the general population, for example, somewhere around 9.5% of all adults experience depression, and over 17% have some major depressive episode. And I look at those kinds of numbers as being underreported, because usually those diagnoses are coming from hospitalizations because they're suicidal, or some major catastrophic event is happening that brings them into care. So I feel like depression, especially among men, is something that's really underreported. So I think these are conservative numbers. Yeah. So when you look at those numbers, you look at the extent to which exercise increases serotonin levels, increases dopamine levels. Those are kind of our happy chemicals in our brain. We lose serotonin between neurotransmitters, is how the brain works. And so exercise is proven to increase serotonin levels and also block the brain's reuptake of dopamine, so it has more available reserves of both dopamine and serotonin. And those are the things that make us feel good. And in fact, when you talk about the high intensity training, it's shown that activity is most effective in the first 30 minutes of workout. So, and then consequent impact of exercise kind of wanes off. So the more you kind of hit it in the beginning, especially when we look at the fact that 30 minutes of high intensity training is equal to about 150 minutes of standard cardio.
Really?
Yeah.
Where did you hear that?
That's I researched that. That's in the research space somewhere. So
it's well known that more than half the population, American population, is not physically active enough. And you said that only 9% report some kind of depression. 17, you said, percent was
have a major depressive episode. Yeah. So 9% is that chronic depression or that diagnosable depressive disorder, and then somewhere between 17 and 18% have a major episode.
So we don't get enough exercise. I'm sure those numbers of depression are much greater to some degree. Some people have it, seasonally or little bouts of it. I'm just wondering, part of me thinks that if you were to trace back our ancestry so long ago, we were active, physical, hunter-gatherers. We were not, tied to our phones. We were not so sedentary as we are today. And it just seems like human, tendency is just going ever more towards more sedentarian.
So stick with that for a second, because that's a huge point. Because along those same lines, right? Back in those days, we were more physically active. We were hunter-gatherers. We were engaging in more like meaningful physical activity. There wasn't really a sedentary lifestyle. Yeah. Not only that, but when we were stressed back then, it wasn't because we weren't performing well at work or because the kids were overacting. It's because like we were being chased by something, or there was like an immediate threat, right? So fight or flight back then was a real survival response. Mm-hmm. So our body is still programmed that way. Yes. So these days when we experience like everyday stress, like whether that's work related or like there's no way I'm going to make this car payment on time, or these kids are just too much today, or whatever it is, mm-hmm. our body thinks that we're being chased by bobcats, yes. or something like that. So like our physical response to that mm-hmm. is still very primitive. Mm-hmm. So that's another reason why like finding that appropriate outlet or that counter mm-hmm. is so important, because our body doesn't know the difference.
Absolutely.
So we're very rooted in that kind of prehistoric.
So we still have that primal instinct that somewhere long down the line, it's still kind of tugging at us and producing these chemicals and possibly the knee-jerk reactions that you mentioned with maybe, I don't want to say problematic, troubled youth. Is that what you said?
Yeah, or at risk, or yeah.
Because like for me, I wasn't one of those youth. I was one of those adults that had those compulsive tendencies, usually in response to some kind of anxiety, state of either panic or whatever it was. So I would indulge in those. But to what you were saying, exercise, but specifically Syphus, allows me to alleviate that feeling because, like you said, you get that like release of, I don't know if it's dopamine or serotonin.
It's both.
Okay, it's both. Mm-hmm. So I should back up a little bit. I am not one of those stereotypical like personal trainers that knows every single statistic, knows everything about anatomy. I was just never that person. I studied exercise science in college. I think I did all right with it. But it was one of those things. It was like it just kind of came somewhat natural to me. But everything that we're doing here in Syphus, you wouldn't learn in a textbook. It was just kind of just something that I kind of pursued out of just interest for me. Yeah. And it's one of those things that like serotonin and that kind of stuff. That's something that like a stereotypical trainer probably we would know, but I am not the most learned person in the fitness industry. I just kind of came across Syphus and I just kind of listen to my body is really what it is. Which
is huge because and we talked about this even with diagnosis mm-hmm. in that like the function of it is to inform treatment. But if you already have the treatment, what's the function of diagnosis at that point, right? Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of times we have to find explanation for things after the fact, and that we have to make sense of it after the fact. But when it feels right and when it seems right for you in the moment when you're doing it, to add whatever language it is to that after the fact, great. We can root it in research or whatever it is or put fancy language to it. Mm-hmm. But knowing your body and knowing how you feel and knowing your patterns of behavior and mood, like there's a lot to be said for that, right? And you don't need the fancy talk attached to that every time. So it's so important to know yourself. And
so when you said that exercise is proven, it's part of your routine mm-hmm. to maybe relieve that aggression or get out that aggression. For me, that's that pursuit of a feeling that I was explaining. It is the purging, the release of that emotion that I'm feeling. And I found that, now this is taking it a step further. I used to be able to score 1,900, not with ease, but pretty frequently. And for the most part nowadays, I kind of chalk it up to, I'm focusing on form more often. But the backside of that most people don't hear about is that I was a much angrier person years ago. And whether or not that's definitely not good, but I used that feeling of anger to push myself to as hard as I possibly could. And that's where the let it out thing in the Sypher comes into play. It means to kind of like feel whatever emotion it is that you're going with, or that kind of bubbles up through you while you're doing Syphus. Don't let it overcome you, but use it. Huge that you say that, because conversations that I have with folks all the time
is, especially with kids who like they hear anger and that's so stigmatized and it's so like it's such a negative thing and it's pathological, and they say don't be angry.
Yeah.
That's stupid. Like we
Right.
all get angry, right? Every day. It's what you do with that anger. Right. And if it doesn't escalate into rage, or if it doesn't result in like destructive activity either to yourself or others, if you're applying that anger to something productive, if you're letting it all out on the turf, or if you're letting it all out in a sport that you participate in, or whatever the situation is, that's completely functional. There's nothing wrong with the emotion. And I think we need to get back to a point where we're not stigmatizing the emotion. We all go through it. It's perfectly normal. Anger's fine. Sadness is fine. To the point where it's impairing, then we really need to start looking at it. But it's okay to experience the full range of emotions and do something functional with it.
It's okay to feel.
Exactly.
And especially for men, honestly. Like, even just before we started shooting, like, I unfortunately have this, like, irrational fear of, or showing my vulnerability of being tired. I don't know what it is. It's like, I'll be like tired. I feel like that shows like I'm being like wimpy or something like that. And I don't know where that comes from, but maybe it's just because of what I do professionally. But just being able to feel is a good thing. And I think that if you really pay attention to whatever it is coming to the surface while you're doing something as stressful as Sypher, it can tell you a lot. I find like today when I'm a much, I guess, I don't want to say happier, I'm just more content with my life. That's why I think it's hard for me to get to that level that I was telling you about, like finding that that feeling, because I like almost have to like think about being not angry, but like grinding.
Like you got to hype yourself about.
Yeah.
And I'm the same way. Like if I come in and I'm just kind of flat, like, all right, well here we go. We'll see how today goes.
Right.
Like I'm not going to perform as well as if I come in with like a mission.
Yes.
Or if I'm like driven by something.
Like a game face.
Yeah, exactly. Whether that's anger informed or like maybe I'm elated about something or whatever it is, like I can apply that.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's much more effective than just coming in flat.
So yeah, feeling an emotion and going with it, and you don't want to go through life bland or like not feeling anything. So, and I think Sypher kind of like pulls emotions out of people. I've even had people say that it brings them to tears because they were overcoming something so difficult and they didn't think they could do it. And I don't think I've ever come to tears, but I think I've come close.
Yeah.
Gosh, fascinating stuff.
So I found something really interesting online that's called
yes.
the Zagernik effect. And it's this idea that people tend to remember negative experiences and feelings longer than positive ones. And that ties back to like incompletion. So like incompletion is really stressful for us.
Yes.
And so in contrast, like to complete something gives us more space to be in the here and now. It allows us to live more in the present. It elevates our mood. It makes us feel more accomplished. So there are studies on this effect, and that's part of what bogs us down from day to day is this feeling of like incompletion or loose ends, or we carry that with us all day. Like, man, I didn't give that as much as I could have, or I didn't do that the right way, or I wonder if I left the oven on at home or whatever. So. Yeah, so I thought that was really fascinating.
The things that you say, like honestly, like when you say them, like it gives me chills because it talks exactly to like how I feel.
Yeah. So and here's a really cool thing. There's an inverse relationship when that task is stressful because there's self-esteem involved. So when you look at something like Sypher, like when you really like bust through it, it's threatening, it's stressful, there's some intelligence to it in that you're trying to figure out the task and you're trying to do it the right way. That sense of accomplishment also has that effect of letting you live in the present more and be more aware and to kind of let it go. So
well, it probably also translates into like what business or family life or whatever, you're more confident in your ability to execute something difficult or take on the challenge that's before you.
Well, and also like it also, so if the task is oriented more to that like threatening or stressful, not in like a life threatening, but like this is really hard, and so as you go along, you're also more motivated to put more into it the next time, just by virtue of it being like a stressful, threatening, intelligent task. So
Well, anybody who's on the turf, anybody who's here doing that, I know they are fighters. They're not averting. They're not walking away from the challenge. They're accepting it. They're willing to take it on. Joe Rogan. I mean, I watch him all the time. Podcast. Do you watch him? Or?
I don't.
Okay.
But I'm aware of him. Yeah.
So I think I just posted something on Facebook like a week ago because he was talking about this very thing that you're bringing up about. There was just recently a study saying that people need to take on challenges and tasks that are difficult because it releases, it boosts self-esteem, releases these chemicals and that kind of like, man, you're spot on. And so you mentioned like that downward feeling of not being able, the incompletion. That for me is my downfall. I have this difficult time of being like ADD, having a whole bunch of things that I want to do, but also having the feeling like I have to finish them all.
Yeah.
So, and I will try that. And I see it all the time. I'll write emails, texts. I will, start editing a podcast or something like that. I won't be able to stop or go to bed until I finish it.
Yeah.
And that can be detrimental because you can be running on fumes. Your final result is sloppy. And same thing with Syphers. If you feel like you just got to complete this task, your form gets sloppy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it just goes so hand in hand.
Well, the other part of that I think is super important is the function of like a checklist, right? Because if we're left to our own devices to kind of think about like, what all can we get done in 60 minutes? That could be, you'd have like, if you have 10 people on the turf, you'd have 10 different interpretations of what that might look like, right? The fact that there's something, quantitative out there that's already designed, that's there, that's visual, is also reassuring because it can be done. It's been planned out. There's, there's a measurement to each part of it. And that's super helpful because, again, like people overwhelm themselves with expectations.
Yes.
And the people that are least successful, and we mentioned like New Year's resolutions, for example, a fraction of a percent of people are successful in seeing those through because what they'll do is they'll set super lofty expectations for themselves that they can't hit. And then the second they don't hit it, they just abandon it, right? So the concept of like a checklist with the Syphers workout kind of eliminates that, where like it's there, it can be done, it's measurable, and it gives you something very concrete to work through that you're not like mapping out.
Right.
So that's super helpful in that space.
Making resolutions. I mean, that's tough. That's kind of where I discussed previously is let's not worry about how much weight you want to lose. Let's not worry about, shortening your belt size or looking a certain way. Let's just focus on just raising your score, which is a fabricated number. I mean, it's still pretty accurate, but it's a number that's just kind of sitting there for you to chase and not focus on the resolution.
Right.
Because we don't want you to feel like, oh, I'm falling short. And that's why most people don't stick with their workout routines, whether it's New Year's resolution or just in general. I think it's like 2 weeks, most people fall off.
Yeah.
It's because they're like, oh, I don't see the results yet. Well, don't worry about the results because you're on your way to them right now. You're not, seeing them.
Yeah, I think it's a better formula for building like healthier habits over a longer period of time versus like chasing that quick fix and then setting yourself up for failure.
We were kind of discussing like what would be the reasons people don't have the form first mentality, or I've tried to help people countless times on, I've taught them how to do mantis. I've showed them how to do bully. They've been doing Syphers for 4 years. What's kind of going on in that mentality or that person's mind to just say, well, no, I'm not going to do it. I mean, they may not be thinking that. And you said something that was just like spot on that I never really thought of is, well, maybe the score is so meaningful to that person because that's one thing that maybe a thing or one thing that they can excel in daily. Maybe they got something else going on in their life that, maybe their boss is riding them or something like that. But you know what? At Syphers, when they come on the turf, they can score high.
Yeah.
And that just gave me a different perspective to something I never even really.
Yeah, and for me that took some time to kind of get in that mindset because again going back to the population I work with, a lot of the folks that I work with a lot of their behaviors have been dismissed as just defiance. And I hate that word because there's something really willful about that. That's like, I want to go against you. When in fact, if you really break it down, it doesn't make any sense because they're creating more work for themselves. Things aren't getting any easier. Like, why would they put so much energy into something that really works against them, right? So there's more to it than that. And so for me, it's fostered this curiosity about why people do the things they do. And I'm the same way where like, if I'm and as new as I am, if I'm on the turf and I'm sweating, I'm giving it my all and I'm really focused on form and the person beside me is just like blasting through everything with disregard. It's easier for me to be like, oh, like whatever. They're just doing their thing. And then I have to really think about like, maybe, like you said, maybe this is that one thing that they have that they can look at and say, everything else went to hell today, but I got that 7, 8, 900, and that's what carries me through the next day.
Which is cool.
Yeah.
Do you think that, see, this is what I grapple with, is maybe, like you say someone's going next to you, speeding, just kind of disregard. I can't tell if sometimes it's lack of awareness, or if it is just, what, I want to post a high score today.
Yeah.
And it's very tough for the pro.
Yeah.
And this is something that we pros will discuss kind of, behind the scenes. And we one of our podcasts with Michelle, we kind of deliberated over it. It's just such a fine line. We know that you guys are paying customers, and just showing up, like I said, is showing up maybe form first for you, just to be coming consistently. We want you to keep coming consistently. But at the same time, we want to show you the right form just to make sure it's safe, first off, and to get the best physical benefit of it. But we're not trying to be a referee, like we say. We're not standing over your head, like telling you, no, you got to do this or that. We want you to become aware of your movements, but we know that you're a paying customer. We don't want to piss you off. We want you to keep coming. We want you to enjoy your time. So the people who maybe don't take the advice as often, they will probably get critiqued less, unfortunately, because for me, like sometimes I feel like I'm a burden to them. I'm trying to help you, but if you're not going to take my advice, or sometimes you have a kind of a snarky comment or the last word. It's unfortunate, and I don't want to come off as like a jerk, but I'm trying to help you. But if you don't want the help, I can't help you.
Yeah, well, and I think that's one of those things where, like we talked about before with a certain movement, I know that if I'm doing it the right way and I'm really focused on how to do it the right way, that I'm going to get the maximum physical benefit from that movement. Movement to movement, right? I'm going to get the most out of that workout that I possibly can. And hopefully the score follows my increased physical capacity, right? That person who's just speeding through it, they may or may not get as much out of that. And at the end of the day, that's on them. I mean, and you mentioned before, we talked about like accountability, especially in terms of like the role of the pro. And at the end of the day, like externally, people can hold you accountable and your situation can hold you accountable. But at the end of the day, like there's no greater accountability than what comes from yourself. So like if you're not internally driven to hold yourself accountable to a standard, whether that's at work or at Sypher, on the turf or wherever, then you miss out. It's not anybody else that's missing out. So
to me, again, I'm not trying to sound like I'm like griping about like the actions of members, but what I just can't understand is people that have been doing it for so long, and like the plate's like, this far away from the line, and they'll kick it to the line, or they they do one, they're a lunge away from the line. They're like, that's good.
That's good enough.
But it's like, do they just not care, or maybe I give it too much weight? Yeah,
well, and I'm curious about what got them to that point. It's like what, because I don't think that just happens. I think at some point maybe, I don't know if maybe there was failure before, or like they weren't performing to a standard, whether that was like a score that they had for themselves set, or whatever it is, and they felt like this was what they needed to give themselves that extra boost. And I, as just another person on the turf, can pay only so much attention to that before it
Right.
starts to take away from my experience.
Blinders.
Right?
Yep.
Exactly, because the more I focus on that and the more I work myself up about that, the worse I'm going to do. And I'm guilty of that. And I'm a freaking therapist, so like I have to be mindful of that stuff.
Yeah.
Like it's a real exercise in patience and
Yeah.
staying focused on what I'm doing.
So now you're going a different place with this. So
Yeah.
that's also kind of where I say like stay in your lane.
Yeah.
Or Joe will say don't do somebody else's workout. That's also kind of like what we were talking about last time, of like kind of keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah.
Well, if that person's able to get an 800 because they shaved these reps or these corners, why can't I?
Yeah.
But that's when you got to stay disciplined, and that's where you said the internal police, your self-talk is more important than the pro saying you're not doing this right. Mm-hmm. Just today, I had somebody who was doing weighted crooks. So it was the very beginning of the workout. And this person was not getting low enough. But I didn't say anything to them because they'd kind of been doing it like that for a while.
Sure.
And I didn't think anything would change. So, but I told the person next to this individual, make sure you get lower on the crook. And the person that I corrected did it. And when she got back to the line, she said something like, well, why isn't that person getting low enough? Or no, what she said, it goes, that person's not getting low. And they were friends. Mm-hmm. So I know them well enough to kind of get like a playful jab. And I'd be like, oh, she was calling you out. Did you hear that? Like, like, I'm not trying to be a jerk, but like, I've tried to correct you so many times that like, this person was relatively new to where like, I felt bad for correcting one person and not the other. And one person adheres to the advice and the other one doesn't, and they're friends. And it's like, I don't want them to think that I'm playing favorites or something like that, when really I just know my members well enough to know who I should say something to and who I shouldn't.
Well, and I think that's one of those things where it's like your role is to kind of bring awareness to it. Yeah. And to offer that feedback and advice, but at the end of the day, what you choose to do with it is really on you. Like, and again, the person who maybe starts out with a lower score, but really focuses on that form and does it the right way and builds that aerobic capacity and eventually reaches that score and exceeds that score at some point, they're getting the maximum benefit of all pieces of that workout. Whereas that person that's just chasing the score, they're not. So, I mean, and that's not on anyone else but them, because you put the information out there,
right? And
it's up to you to choose what to do with it. So
it's perfectly said. Yeah. All right. The point you just brought up about kind of like the person who starts off kind of slowly and really focusing on like yourself. Yeah. Like I explained before, you haven't had that like uptick in score. I noticed that I teach people, new people, a little bit differently than kind of the experienced person, obviously, but I will almost like tell people like, we're going to focus on form. Form is first. I'm going to show you the basic way to do it. But like, for instance, the guy that was going with you today, it's only his third time, single leg bucks. I mean, that's such a complicated movement. Yeah. I just want you to get the basic nuts and bolts out of it. I'm not going to really tell you, okay, we want to make sure like every little thing is pristine. I just want the guy to get through it. Yeah. So I find myself kind of showing people, okay, we're not chasing a score, but you're going after a score. Eventually you're going to learn form first, but I'm not even going to throw that at you when who knows if you're going to be back. Who's this guy telling me form first?
Success, yeah.
So let's just go ahead and play this game for a while, and eventually you're going to learn what form first means.
Yeah. Which is huge, because I mean, that same guy, we talked about like his movement from last time to this time in terms of score, and that was super empowering for him. Yeah. So I would imagine all of that helps build his confidence, where he will come back, and then you can sneak in that additional form work or whatever. So yeah.
Jeez, we got to write a book. Let's wrap it up. I'm just fascinated with how much is coming of this. That we definitely got to keep continuing this on, even past maybe what I've kind of got planned for this fall, just because there's too much. It's so dense that we can't talk about it all in an hour and a half. The things that you're bringing up, and then Syphus, they're both so complex, and they're so well wedded together. they to me they're like synonyms.
Yeah, it's a natural fit. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just, for me, it's just like a Sypher is a microcosm for everything that you're discussing. And it's hard for me to kind of like tell somebody that when it's their first time coming in, but it's just like, just get on the turf, play this game, and you'll find out what this form first mentality is about. So.
It's huge, and that's part of what really attracted me to this conversation, is that to me, like it's a no-brainer. Like it's, I mean, no pun intended, but like there's so much of the mental health brain space that goes into what you do here that's just kind of naturally worked into the model, that I felt like that conversation had to happen.
So you put it into words,
Yeah.
I put it into like activity.
Yeah,
you know
exactly,
what I mean?
exactly.
That's perfect, because I need a translator.
Definitely, yeah.